At our family barbecue that summer in Texas, my brother-in-law raised his beer and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." And the whole family roared with laughter. I stood there with the plate of pumpkin salad I had spent my entire Saturday morning preparing, the Texas heat pressing against my skin while I tried to keep my smile steady. The laughter kept rolling, blending with the smell of smoked brisket and the high-pitched screams of kids playing tag across the Williams' perfect backyard. I'm Haley, 32, a freelance designer who grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Dallas where neighbors watched out for each other and no one pretended to be better than anyone else. I married Matt when I was 28. He's 35 now, a quiet banker who always tells me it's just how they are, babe, whenever his family tosses out one of their backhanded comments. The Williams family. "They're not bad people," Matt always says. "Just old Texas money layered in polite smiles and dismissive nods that leave you guessing whether you belong." Patricia, my mother-in-law, had barely looked at me when I arrived, wearing her pastel linen dress, her hair styled like she was headed to a country club fundraiser. She took the salad from my hands, glanced at it, and said, "Oh, thank you for trying," before placing it on the side table away from the lineup of dishes from their preferred caterer. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. I had driven across town that morning to find the perfect butternut squash at the farmer's market just to make this family feel like home to me, and they never even looked. I tried to shake it off standing near Matt as Chad, his younger brother, took center stage. Chad is 33, a real estate agent who brags about closing deals while golfing with his clients, the kind of man who smirks when you speak and corrects you even when you're right. Samantha, his wife, gave me a small smile from across the patio, but she quickly looked away when Patricia called her over to help with the wine glasses. Matt sipped his beer, checking his phone for the score of the game, and I wished he would notice how quiet I was standing next to him, how I felt small in the shadow of his family's laughter. And then Chad said it. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." His voice was so casual, so coded in that joking tone people use when they want to humiliate you but need the protection of laughter to avoid being called cruel. Matt laughed. A short, awkward laugh, but it was enough. It echoed in my ears louder than Chad's words. I looked at Matt, waiting for him to say something, to tell his brother to stop, to even glance at me and see the pain that was rising like bile in my throat. Instead, he gave me a soft nudge, the same one he used when I got too emotional, and said, "Haley, don't be so sensitive. It's just Chad." The edges of my vision blurred, the sun above burning into my skin as the scent of barbecue turned my stomach. My hands felt cold, even in the Texas heat, as I clenched my cup of lemonade, the condensation dripping onto my dress. The years I spent trying to fit in with them, laughing at their jokes, nodding politely during conversations about country club memberships and vacation homes, suddenly felt heavy in my chest. All those nights, Matt told me, they'll warm up to you eventually, and the mornings I rehearsed small talk in the mirror before family gatherings, they all collapsed into the space between Chad's grin and Matt's soft chuckle. I was done being the girl who tried to earn her place in their world. I lifted my cup, locked eyes with Chad across the patio, and let a small, calm smile cross my lips. "Challenge accepted," I said, loud enough for him to hear. Chad's smirk faltered just for a second, and Matt turned to me, confusion in his eyes. But I was already turning away, the lemonade warm in my hand, my mind racing with a single clear thought I had never let myself consider before. I was going to leave, and this time I wasn't coming back. I walked across the patio, weaving between folding chairs and picnic tables covered in checkered cloth. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm, like I was just going to grab another soda from the cooler. The laughter behind me felt like a wave crashing and then fading into small, uncomfortable murmurs. I could feel Matt's eyes on me, but I didn't turn around. The smell of charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce stuck in the air, heavy and thick. Near the cooler, I opened it, letting the cold air hit my face for a moment while I breathed, steadying myself. I grabbed a can of sparkling water, cracked it open, and took a long sip, letting the fizz burn down my throat. "Haley," Matt called, his voice low, cautious. I turned, leaning against the fence, watching him walk toward me with that half-apologetic smile I knew too well. He looked back at the patio where Chad was already pulling attention back to himself with another loud story, beer in hand, acting like nothing had happened. Matt rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he was about to ask me to let something go. Come on, babe, you know Chad. He was just joking, he said, his eyes soft like he was trying to be reasonable. I stared at him, letting the silence grow between us until he shifted on his feet. You laughed, I said. Matt's mouth opened then closed. His eyes dropped to the ground for a second before meeting mine again. I didn't mean to. It was just everyone was laughing. I didn't want to make it awkward, he said, voice tightening. It was already awkward, Matt, I replied, my voice steady, softer than I felt. You let him say that. And you laughed. He sighed, glancing back at the family who were now gathered near the grill, pretending not to watch us while they passed around paper plates. Haley, please don't make this a big deal, he said, taking a step closer. I took another sip of my drink, feeling the bubbles settle the heat in my chest. It's not a big deal to you because you've never had to fight to belong here, I said. Matt's shoulders dropped and he reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. Haley, I shook my head, cutting him off. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady if I let him say another word. For a moment we stood there, two people who had once promised forever, now separated by a truth he didn't want to see. His family would always come first, even when they humiliated me. Patricia called out from the patio, Haley, sweetie, can you bring over the extra napkins, sweetie? The word hit like a slap, sugar-coated and sharp. I looked at her, her perfect hair, her polite smile, and the way her eyes flickered away from mine, dismissing me even as she used my name. I'll get them, Matt said, quickly turning away before I could answer. As he walked off, I felt the final crack, the moment the last piece of me that had tried to fit into this family finally broke. I didn't want to be part of a family that saw me as an afterthought, someone to tolerate until I could be replaced by someone more suitable. I looked around the yard at the kids playing with bubbles, at the men talking about sports, at the women comparing vacation plans for the summer. None of them noticed me. None of them cared who I was, what I had sacrificed, or how hard I had tried. If I disappeared tomorrow, maybe they really wouldn't notice. But I would. I finished the last sip of my drink and crushed the can in my hand, the metal folding in on itself with a sharp crack that felt like a promise. I walked back toward the patio, placing the empty can in the recycling bin, moving past Matt without looking at him as he handed Patricia the napkins. Thank you, sweetie, she said again, not noticing the way my jaw clenched. I turned back to the table where Chad was still laughing, still holding court, still so sure of himself. His eyes met mine, and I saw at the flicker of confusion, the small uncertain shift in his smirk. I smiled. Challenge accepted, I repeated, clear and calm. And in that moment I knew. I was done trying to belong. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Tomorrow I was going to leave, and this time I wouldn't look back. That night, while Matt slept, I packed my suitcase in silence. I disappeared just like Chad said I would. It was 2 a.m. When I slipped out of bed, the soft hum of the ceiling fan covering the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floor. The room smelled faintly of Matt's cologne, and for a moment it almost stopped me. Almost. I stood there looking at him, sleeping, his arm draped over the empty space where I'd been lying, breathing softly, unaware that everything was about to change. My chest tightened, a sharp ache pushing against my ribs, but I didn't let it break me. Not now. I turned and walked to the closet, pulling out my old duffel bag, the one I used in college when I had nothing but secondhand clothes and big dreams. I pulled it open on the bed, careful not to wake Matt, and started folding clothes one piece at a time, stacking them in quiet layers. My hands shook as I packed my jeans, my favorite black sweater, the white blouse I wore to every family dinner, trying to convince myself I belonged. I grabbed my laptop chargers and the sketchbook I kept hidden in the bottom drawer, the one filled with design ideas I was too afraid to share. A single tear slid down my cheek, falling onto the zipper as I closed the bag. I wiped it away quickly, breathing in and out steady like I was preparing for a race. I walked to the kitchen, turning on the small light above the sink, the glow spilling across the counter where Matt left his keys and wallet every night. I opened my banking app, my fingers hovering over the screen before I moved half of our joint savings into my personal account, the one I had kept open quietly just in case. I paid the rent for the next month, the utilities, the internet, leaving the account clear, no debts, no excuses for anyone to call me irresponsible. It was cleaner this way fair, so they couldn't say I took advantage when I left. I pulled a sticky note from the drawer, writing with shaking hands. Matt, I need time. I'm safe, don't look for me. I placed it on top of the counter, sliding my wedding ring next to it, the diamond catching the kitchen light one last time before I turned it off. My phone buzzed, and I jumped, my heart pounding. It was Megan. I answered in a whisper. I'm ready, I said. Are you sure? She asked, her voice soft but steady. No, but I'm doing it anyway, I whispered back. I'm outside, she replied. I hung up, pulling my duffel over my shoulder, taking one last look around the kitchen, the living room, the small dining table where I spent so many nights waiting for Matt to come home from work. I stepped outside, the Texas night thick and warm, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and the distant hum of highway traffic. Megan's car was parked at the curb, engine idling, headlights off. She stepped out, her hair tied back, wearing a sweatshirt and leggings, looking exactly like the friend who had promised me years ago. If you ever need to go, I'll be there. She opened the trunk, helping me load the bag, her eyes meeting mine. Let's get you out of here, she said. I nodded, sliding into the passenger seat, closing the door softly behind me. As Megan pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the small house, the porch light still on, the curtains still swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. I turned away, facing forward, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in years, it felt like a road I chose for myself. We drove through the empty streets, past dark storefronts and gas stations glowing under harsh lights. Megan kept her eyes on the road, one hand gripping the wheel, the other holding her coffee cup. The smell of burnt coffee filled the car, mixing with the scent of the leather seats. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy, it was necessary. My phone buzzed on my lap, lighting up the car with Matt's name on the screen. I turned it over, letting it ring until it stopped. It started again, his name flashing, the vibration humming against my thigh like a warning. Megan glanced at me, her eyebrows pulling together. Are you going to answer? She asked softly. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. If I do, I'll go back, I whispered. She nodded, pressing her lips together before looking back at the road. You're doing the right thing, she said. I didn't answer because I wasn't sure if I believed it yet. We passed the city limits, seeing the lights of Dallas fading in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness of the Texas highway. I rolled the window down, letting the warm wind hit my face, pushing the tears back into my eyes before they could fall. Hours later, the sign for Austin appeared, glowing green against the pale dawn sky. The city lights shimmered ahead, promising something I couldn't name yet, but something that felt like hope. Megan pulled off the highway, driving through quiet streets until we reached the small neighborhood where I had booked an Airbnb. It was a tiny duplex with a blue door, flowers in pots on the steps, and a single porch light that flickered softly in the early morning breeze. We sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. You ready? Megan asked. I looked at her, at the friend who had shown up without question, and nodded. Yeah, I said. We got out, unloading my duffel bag and laptop bag, carrying them up the steps. I unlocked the door, the code beeping before it clicked open, letting us into a small living room that smelled like lavender and old wood. I set my bag down, taking in the worn couch, the small kitchen with chipped counters, the curtains swaying in the morning air. It wasn't much, but it was mine, at least for now. Megan placed the keys on the counter and turned to me. You call me if you need anything, she said. Anything. I nodded, pulling her into a hug, holding on tighter than I meant to. Thank you, I whispered. She pulled back, giving me a soft smile. Get some rest, she said before walking out the door, leaving me standing in the quiet. I locked the door behind her, pressing my forehead against the cool wood for a moment before I turned and walked to the bathroom. I flipped on the light, the harsh glow reflecting off the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My hair was messy, dark circles under my eyes, my skin pale, but my eyes, they were steady, sharper than they had ever been. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, watching the fog on the mirror clear. I unpacked only what I needed, placing my laptop on the small desk by the window, plugging in my phone, and sitting on the edge of the bed. The sheets smelled clean, the kind of crisp laundry scent that reminded me of summer days hanging clothes on a line. My phone buzzed again, Matt's name lighting up the screen, followed by a text. Please, Haley, just call me. We can fix this. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them away, letting them fall silently onto the blanket. I turned the phone off, placing it face down on the desk. Outside, the city was waking up, cars, passing birds, calling the world moving on like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I lay back on the bed, pulling the blanket around me, letting the exhaustion finally take over. As I closed my eyes, I promised myself this was the start, not the end. What would you have done if you were me? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Tomorrow I would find work, find a way to live, and build a life that was mine. Tomorrow I would begin again. In Austin, I started over with an old laptop, one suitcase of clothes, and a fragile sense of freedom. The first morning, I sat at the small desk by the window, the sunlight spilling across the scratched wood, dust dancing in the air. I opened my laptop, the screen flickering to life, the keys worn from years of edits and late-night designs. I pulled up freelance platforms, my heart pounding as I filled out profiles, attaching pieces of old work, hoping someone would see the value I was trying to offer. I applied for anything I could find: small jobs, designing Instagram graphics, flyers for local yoga studios, menu boards for food trucks. Each time I hit submit, it felt like I was taking back a piece of myself. Money was tight, but I managed to pay for coffee at the corner cafe, a place called Sunbird Coffee. It smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, the floor creaked, and the mismatched chairs reminded me of the coffee shops I loved during college. I spent hours there working on designs, headphones in, blocking out the world, while I adjusted fonts and layered colors, trying to remember why I loved design in the first place. One afternoon, as I was editing a logo for a dog walking business, a voice interrupted my focus. "That's a nice layout. You've got a good eye for balance." I looked up to see a woman in her 50s, silver hair pulled back in a low bun, her eyes sharp but kind. She wore a simple linen shirt, sleeves rolled, an apron tied around her waist. "I'm Eleanor," she said, sticking out her hand. "Haley," I replied, shaking her hand, feeling the warmth of her grip. "You're here almost every day," she said, glancing at my laptop. "Working on something big?" I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "Just trying to keep going," I said. Eleanor nodded, pulling out the chair across from me, sitting down with a soft sigh. "I used to be a designer too," she said. "Before I opened this place, I looked around, noticing the handwritten chalkboard menu, the mismatched signage, the logo on the to-go cups that looked dated but charming." "I can tell," I said, smiling. She smiled back, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "If you're interested, I've been thinking of updating the branding for Sunbird. The place could use a refresh, but I want it to keep its heart," she said. My breath caught a spark of hope flickering in my chest. "I'd love to," I said quickly, then paused, trying to sound calmer. "If you're sure," "I'm sure," she said, standing up. "Come by tomorrow morning. We can talk details." She walked back behind the counter, leaving me sitting there, my heart racing, fingers trembling as I closed my laptop. That night, back in the small duplex, I opened my email and saw Matt's name again and again. Missed calls, voicemails I didn't listen to. His messages shifted from anger to apology to pleading. "Please call me. You can't just leave like this. We can fix this." Then back to anger. I blocked his number, my thumb hovering over the screen before I pressed the block button, letting the silence fill the space where his voice had been. I opened Instagram, seeing Chad's story pop up, the barbecue, him holding a beer, laughing with that same smirk. "Quieter when some people disappear," the caption read. I closed the app, deleting it from my phone, shutting down the noise that had followed me across cities. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, the Texas sky still dark, but I felt different. I felt like maybe I had a place to go, something to build. I pulled out my sketchbook, flipping to a blank page, pencil in hand, ready to draw again. The bell above the door chimed when I walked into Sunbird that morning, the scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh espresso greeting me like a quiet promise. Eleanor was already there, wiping down the counter, her hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up and smiled, waving me over. "Haley, come sit," she said, gesturing to the corner table by the window. I slid into the chair, pulling out my sketchbook, feeling both nervous and excited as I set it on the table. Eleanor brought over 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of me before sitting down with a soft sigh. "I've been thinking about this place," she began, looking around the cafe. I love it, but I know it needs a new face. Something that feels like who we are now. I nodded, flipping open my sketchbook to a page of logo ideas I had worked on the night before. Simple lines, warm colors, a sunbird in flight, coffee steam curling like wings. Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked down at the drawings, tracing the pencil lines with her finger. You get it, she whispered, her voice catching for a moment before she cleared her throat. How much would you charge for a full rebrand, logo, menu board, signage? I hesitated, the fear of asking for too much tightening in my chest. Eleanor, I know I'm rebuilding. I don't want to overcharge. She held up a hand, shaking her head. Haley, I've been in your shoes. Your work has value. Tell me what it's worth. I took a breath, quoting a price that was fair, one that would cover my rent for 2 months and groceries for a while. Eleanor didn't blink, just nodded. It's a deal, she said, reaching across the table to shake my hand. We spent the morning talking about colors and fonts, the feeling she wanted customers to have when they walked in, the way she wanted the community to feel seen here. She shared stories about her past as a designer, the agency job she left behind when she decided she was done building other people's dreams. I opened Sunbird because I wanted to build something of my own, she said, sipping her coffee, the steam rising between us. Don't forget to build something of yours too. I walked back to the duplex that afternoon, the Austin sun warm on my shoulders, the air carrying the scent of food trucks and wildflowers. I felt lighter, as if the weight I had carried from Dallas was loosening with every step I took. When I got home, I opened my laptop, starting on the first drafts of the new branding, letting the colors and shapes flow, feeling the quiet pride of creating something real again. My phone buzzed on the desk. Matt's name flashing across the screen again and again. The voicemails were piling up, the texts coming in waves, shifting from apologies to anger to desperation. You can't just disappear. Please, Haley, talk to me. I'm sorry, just come home. I closed my eyes, letting the noise pass through me before I turned the phone off, sliding it into the drawer. Later that night, I checked my email, hoping for a new freelance request, something to keep me moving forward. Instead, I saw a notification from Instagram, a message request from Chad. His profile picture showed him at the BBQ, beer in hand, the same smirk on his face. The message was just a screenshot of his story, the caption still burned into my mind. Quieter when some people disappear. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening, feeling the familiar burn in my chest. I blocked him without replying, deleting the app once more, letting the silence replace the noise. The next morning, as I was working on the color palette for Sunbird, my email pinged with a new message. From Eleanor, subject opportunity. Haley, a friend of mine at a local agency, is looking for a lead designer for a new project. I told them about you. They want to meet. I read it again, my breath catching the words sinking in as a smile spread across my face. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. What would you have done if you were me? Because I knew then I wasn't just rebuilding. I was becoming someone new. I didn't know my first big project would be directly tied to the Williams family. I was sitting at my small desk in Austin, the morning light warming my shoulders, when the email came in. The subject line read, Crown Foods rebrand opportunity. I clicked it open, scanning the details. They were looking to rebrand their organic product line, a project big enough to pay my bills for months, to fill my portfolio with the kind of work that could take me to the next level. But my stomach dropped when I reached the end of the email. Crown Foods was partially owned by the Williams family. And Chad, the same Chad who told me I could disappear without anyone noticing, was listed as the distribution manager overseeing the project rollout. I pushed back from the desk, my heart pounding, the old fear creeping up my spine. I stood pacing the small living room, the email still open on the screen, glowing like a warning. I called Eleanor, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. She picked up on the second ring. Haley, she greeted, her voice warm, steady. It's Crown Foods, I said, breathless. They're tied to the Williams. Chad is on this. There was a pause, the sound of a coffee grinder in the background. Do you want this project? She asked. I closed my eyes, letting the question settle. Yes, I said softly. I need it. Then take it, Eleanor replied. This isn't about them, it's about you. This is your chance to prove to yourself what you can do. Not for revenge. For you. I sank down onto the couch, letting her words wash over me. But I can't work directly with Chad, I said. You don't have to, she assured. Work through the agency. Set your boundaries. I exhaled, feeling the tension leave my shoulders as I nodded to myself. Okay, I whispered. That afternoon, I called the agency, speaking with a woman named Tasha who was handling the Crown Foods account. Her voice was brisk but kind, asking me to send over my portfolio and a proposal by the end of the day. I stayed up late putting together a presentation that showcased my clean design style, bright colors, simple fonts that let the products shine. I included mock-ups for packaging, digital ads, social media concepts, everything that would tell the story of Crown Foods in a way that felt fresh, modern, and real. When I hit send, I closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair, breathing deeply, letting the fear slide off me even for just a moment. The next morning, Tasha called. Haley, your proposal was the strongest by far, she said. We'd like you to lead the design on this project, working with our internal team. My chest tightened, relief and excitement flooding through me. Thank you, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Over the next week, I threw myself into the work. I joined video calls with Tasha and her team, discussing color palettes, product messaging, target demographics. I built mood boards, sent samples, and received real feedback that pushed me to be better, sharper. They respected my voice, valued my opinion, asked for my ideas, and actually listened when I spoke. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Each night, I fell asleep exhausted but satisfied, the kind of tired that comes from building something that matters. And then one morning, Tasha sent an email with the subject Presentation Day. We would present the final branding to Crown Foods leadership at their Dallas headquarters. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Dallas. The city I had left in the middle of the night. The city where the Williams family lived, where Chad and Matt still breathed in their comfortable world, believing I was gone for good. I closed my eyes, feeling the old fear try to slip back in. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose yourself? I opened my eyes, taking a deep breath, and replied to Tasha's email. I'll be there. The morning I packed for Dallas, the air in Austin was heavy with summer heat pressing against the windows like it was daring me to leave. I folded my black blazer, the one I had saved for moments that mattered, and slipped my laptop into my bag, checking for chargers, pens, the small leather notebook I used for notes during client meetings. I paused by the mirror, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, staring at the woman looking back at me. I saw the quiet determination in her eyes, the steady breath she took, and I nodded. You can do this. The drive north was along the highway lined with fields and gas stations, the sky so wide it felt like it might swallow me whole. I listened to a playlist Eleanor had sent me, soft acoustic songs that reminded me I wasn't alone in this, that there was a world outside of fear. I arrived in Dallas just before sunset, checking into a small hotel near downtown. The air conditioning humming as I stood by the window looking out over the skyline I once called home. I thought about Matt, about the nights we spent downtown grabbing tacos after long days, the way he used to reach for my hand when we crossed the street. The memory stung, but I let it pass like a wave, rolling in and then back out. The next morning I dressed carefully, pulling on my blazer, tying my hair back, applying a soft layer of makeup, not for them but for me, for the confidence it gave me when I looked in the mirror. I arrived at the Crown Foods headquarters early, standing in the parking lot for a moment, letting the building come into focus. It was glass and steel, clean lines, the kind of place that smelled like money and ambition. I walked through the glass doors, greeted by the receptionist, who handed me a visitor badge. My hands didn't shake as I clipped it to my jacket, my feet steady as I followed Tasha through the bright lobby toward the conference room. The room was large, windows letting in the Dallas sun, a long table set with water bottles, notepads, and a projector waiting to be turned on. Tasha smiled at me, her calm presence steadying the buzz in my chest. You ready? She asked. I nodded, taking my seat, opening my laptop, aligning my notes, just so, breathing in, breathing out. The executives filed in, some in suits, some in crisp button-downs, greeting each other with practiced handshakes and polite smiles. And then Chad walked in. He was wearing a light gray suit, his hair styled back, that familiar smirk on his face, as he laughed at something another executive said. His eyes swept the room and landed on me, his smile faltering for just a moment before he caught himself adjusting the cuffs of his shirt like it was nothing. I looked back at him, my face calm, my eyes steady. No fear. He took a seat near the middle of the table, pulling out his phone, scrolling through messages, pretending not to see me as the meeting began. Tasha introduced the team, then nodded to me. Haley will lead today's presentation. She's been the creative force behind this rebrand. I stood connecting my laptop to the projector, the first slide appearing on the screen, the colors bright, the new logo clean, and welcoming, the tagline reading "Real Food. Real People." I spoke clearly, walking them through the concept, the design choices, the market research we had conducted, the way customers wanted brands to feel human, honest, not polished and cold. I shared mock-ups of the packaging, digital ads, social media layouts, showing them how the brand would live in the world. They nodded, some taking notes, some leaning forward, asking questions about color psychology, typography, placement. And then Chad spoke. So you're telling us we should trust a freelancer who walked out on her own family to lead our rebrand? The room went silent, all eyes shifting from Chad to me, waiting for a reaction. I looked at him, tilting my head slightly, letting the silence stretch. Yes, I said calmly. Because I didn't walk out on my family, I walked toward myself. And that's exactly what your customers want from you too. Honesty. The room stayed quiet for a beat before someone cleared their throat, breaking the tension. Tasha smiled, nodding at me to continue. Have you ever had to stand your ground when the world expected you to break? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I clicked to the next slide, my voice steady as I continued the presentation, knowing this was just the beginning. I walked into the conference room and there was Chad sitting at the head of the table, eyes wide with shock when he saw me. I kept my steps, even my shoulders back, wearing my navy blue blazer and black heels that clicked against the polished floor. My hair was cut shorter now, framing my face, reminding me every time I looked in the mirror that I wasn't the woman I used to be. Chad's smirk dropped for a moment before he forced it back, leaning back in his chair like he was still in control of the room. But I saw it, the way his fingers tapped nervously against the table, the way he glanced around to see who else had noticed. Matt was there too, seated 2 chairs down, wearing a gray suit and a look of stunned confusion, like he was seeing a ghost he wasn't ready to face. His eyes followed me as I set up my laptop, and I could feel the weight of everything unspoken pressing between us. Patricia was seated near the middle, her lips pressed into a tight line, her pearl necklace resting against her navy dress, her eyes watching me closely as if trying to find a flaw, a crack, something she could call weakness. I didn't give her one. Tasha cleared her throat, smiling as she stood to address the room. Thank you all for being here. Today we're excited to present the rebranding strategy for Crown Foods. Leading the creative side of this project is Haley. I took a breath, clicked the first slide, and turned to face the room. Crown Foods has a loyal customer base, but your customers are aging out. They want transparency, authenticity, brands that reflect the values they live by every day, I said, clicking to the next slide with graphs showing customer demographic shifts, market opportunities, and engagement data. The room was silent, eyes fixed on the screen, as I walked them through the new visual identity, the warm color palette, the updated logo, the tagline that told customers Crown Foods wasn't hiding behind corporate walls anymore. Real food. Real people. I showed them how the new packaging would stand out on shelves, how the digital ads would capture attention without feeling forced, how the social media strategy would connect with the customers they were losing. This isn't just a rebrand, I said, meeting Chad's eyes as he shifted in his chair. This is what will save Crown Foods next quarter. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence as I let them sit with the reality of what I had shown them. Chad cleared his throat, forcing a smirk back onto his face. Interesting concept, he said, his tone light, but I could hear the tension under it. But do you really think a freelancer can understand what a company like ours needs? Before I could speak, the CEO, a tall man named Robert with a calm presence, leaned forward. I think it's exactly what we need, Robert said. This is the most clear and actionable plan we've seen, and it aligns with the direction we need to go. Chad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, looking down at the papers in front of him, his fingers drumming faster. Matt looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and something else, Something like regret, but I didn't look away. I turned back to Robert, answering the questions he asked about the timeline, the implementation, the rollout plan. When the presentation ended, people began standing, stretching, chatting about next steps. I shut my laptop, sliding it into my bag, letting out a slow breath as the tension eased from my shoulders. Matt stepped toward me, clearing his throat, but before he could speak, Patricia's voice cut through the noise. "Haley," she said, her voice cool, controlled. "You've changed so much." I turned to look at her, letting a small, calm smile cross my lips. And I said nothing. Patricia's eyes searched mine, waiting for me to slip to fill the silence with an apology I didn't owe. I kept my smile steady, polite, a quiet boundary she couldn't cross. Her lips twitched, the corner of her mouth pulling back as if she wanted to say more, but she stopped, pressing her pearls against her collarbone instead. "Excuse me," I said, calmly stepping around her to collect my notes from the table. Matt was waiting, hovering near the door, shifting his weight like he was bracing for a storm. His tie was loose, his hair slightly messy, like he had run his hand through it 100 times during the meeting. "Haley," he said, his voice soft the way it used to sound on quiet mornings. I paused, glancing at him, letting the quiet stretch until he swallowed. "Can we talk?" he asked, his eyes pleading. "About what?" I asked, keeping my tone even. He looked down at his shoes, then back up, his blue eyes clouded. "About us," he said. "There is no us, Matt," I replied, my voice gentle but clear. His shoulders slumped, his lips pressing together as he nodded, trying to find words that wouldn't come. "I didn't know how to defend you," he said finally. "I thought staying quiet would keep the peace." "And it did," I said, meeting his eyes. "For everyone except me." The room around us was emptying, people collecting folders, making lunch plans, pretending not to listen. I could feel Patricia's eyes on us, Chad's too, burning with curiosity. Matt opened his mouth, but I shook my head. "This isn't the place," I said. He hesitated, then stepped back, letting me pass, the air between us filled with everything we would never say. I walked out of the conference room into the hallway, the cool air brushing against my skin, reminding me I was free. My heels clicked against the tile, each step grounding me as I moved toward the elevator. Tasha caught up with me, her eyes bright, a smile spreading across her face. "You killed it in there," she said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Robert wants to push forward with your rollout plan. This is going to be huge for you." "Thank you," I said, letting the relief settle into my chest. "You okay?" she asked, lowering her voice. "I will be," I replied. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, turning to face her. "Lunch soon," she said, pointing at me with a grin. "Yeah," I said, smiling back as the doors closed. Inside the elevator, I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes for a moment as the floors ticked down. I could feel the weight of the morning lifting, replaced with something warm, something like pride. The doors opened to the lobby, the glass walls letting in the Texas sun, people moving in and out with their coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. I walked outside, the heat wrapping around me, the breeze carrying the scent of cut grass and distant traffic. I pulled my phone from my bag, turning it on, letting the notifications roll in, but I didn't open them. Not yet. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Eleanor. Subject: proud of you. I smiled, standing there on the sidewalk, letting the sun warm my face. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever had to face people who once doubted you? I slid my phone back into my bag, lifted my chin, and started walking toward the parking lot. Because I wasn't done yet. Chad didn't know the project I had just presented was the only thing keeping him in his management seat. After the meeting, I learned from Tasha that Crown Foods had been under pressure from the parent company for months. Sales were dropping, and Chad's division was on the chopping block unless they could prove growth in the next quarter. I knew it, but I didn't use it against him. I focused on the work, making sure the rebrand was clean, effective, and ready to launch fast. It wasn't about Chad or the past. It was about the promise I made to myself the day I left Dallas. One evening, while I was reviewing the packaging proofs, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and the message was short. "Thank you for handling things professionally. You could have made it messy, but you didn't." It was signed Samantha. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the words settle. I typed back. "Thank you, Samantha. Wishing you well. No more, no less." Later that week, Matt's name popped up again, another message in the chain of missed calls and unread texts. Haley, please. One coffee, just closure. That's all. I didn't answer. I didn't need closure from him. I had already closed that chapter the night I packed my bag. The next day, an email from Chad landed in my inbox CCing the Crown Foods marketing team and Tasha. We're hosting a BBQ at the headquarters courtyard this Friday to celebrate the launch and thank the team. Hope you can join us, Haley. I stared at the email, remembering the last barbecue, the laughter, the look on Matt's face when I walked away. This was different. Friday came with a humid Texas breeze, the kind that stuck to your skin and made the air taste like heat. I wore a simple black dress, hair pulled back, sunglasses on as I walked through the gates into the courtyard. There were folding tables with checkered cloths, a smoker sending plumes of hickory-scented smoke into the sky, people laughing and holding cans of LaCroix while country music played low in the background. Chad stood near the grill, beer in hand, wearing jeans and a polo, greeting people with that same polished smile. When he saw me, his smile froze for a beat before snapping back into place. Haley, glad you could make it, he said, voice loud, trying to sound casual. I nodded, taking a water bottle from the cooler, twisting off the cap. Thanks for the invite, I said simply. As people gathered around, Chad launched into a small speech about teamwork, change, and how the rebrand would position Crown Foods for a stronger future. His eyes kept darting to me like he wanted me to acknowledge him, to give him credit for letting me be there. I stood quietly, sipping my water, letting the words wash over me without reacting. I didn't need to prove anything here, because I already had. I moved to a quiet corner under a tree, the branches shifting in the warm breeze as I watched people line up for brisket and potato salad. Tasha waved when she saw me walking over with a plate in her hand. Glad you came, she said, taking a bite of cornbread. You deserve to see this moment. I smiled, feeling the tension in my shoulders loosen. Thanks for believing in me, I said. Tasha nudged me gently with her elbow. You made it easy, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. They can't ignore your work now. I nodded, sipping my water, feeling the hum of conversations around me, the clatter of tongs against trays, the occasional laugh from a nearby group. Chad made his way over, wiping his hands on a napkin, that tight smile back on his face. Haley, enjoying yourself? He asked, his tone too casual, like he was performing for the people within earshot. It's a nice event, I replied, keeping my voice calm. He nodded, taking a sip of his beer, shifting his weight. I have to admit the campaign looks good, he said, his eyes flicking away before meeting mine again. You've got talent. I tilted my head, studying him, the way his jaw tightened, the faint crease between his eyebrows that appeared when he was under pressure. Thank you, I said simply. Chad glanced around, lowering his voice. This launch is a big deal for us, he said. It's going to keep the division here. I could hear the edge in his voice, the way he tried to hide the desperation behind small talk. I know, I said. He blinked, surprised, his mouth opening slightly before closing again. I'm just saying it's good you're here, he added quickly, forcing a chuckle. Before I could respond, Samantha appeared, carrying a tray of drinks, her eyes meeting mine with a small, almost grateful smile. Hi, Haley, she said, her voice soft. Hi, Samantha, I replied, letting a real smile touch my lips for a moment. She handed Chad a drink, brushing a hand over his arm before moving to talk to another group, leaving him standing there clutching his cup. Chad cleared his throat, glancing after her before looking back at me. You know, you could have made this a lot harder, he said, quieter now. But you didn't. I let the words hang there, the breeze rustling the leaves above us. It wasn't about you, I said, locking eyes with him. His smirk faltered, and for a split second I saw the weight of everything he was trying to hold together. He opened his mouth to say something, but the music shifted and people started calling him over to take a photo by the smoker. Anyway, he muttered, turning away, enjoy the food. I watched him walk back to his circle, his shoulders tight, laughter forced as he posed for a photo, holding up a plate of brisket like a trophy. I stepped back into the shade, letting the moment settle, the air warm against my skin. What would you have done if you were me? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this, because I knew the moment for truth was coming. I moved away from the crowd, letting the music and laughter fade behind me. The evening sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and pink, the smell of smoke and sweet barbecue clinging to the air. I found a quiet spot by the fence taking a breath as I watched people posing for photos holding plates piled high with brisket and coleslaw laughing like nothing in the world could touch them. Matt was there too across the yard standing near a picnic table with a beer in hand. He kept glancing over his eyes, catching mine before he looked away, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, the shadows under his eyes deep. For a moment the memories came back: soft mornings with coffee, his quiet laugh when we watched movies, the way he used to squeeze my hand during traffic. But they felt like echoes now, distant and soft, unable to pull me back. A shadow fell across the grass as Chad approached again, his beer half empty, his smile forced as he tried to look relaxed. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes restless. "It's a nice evening," I said. He nodded, rocking back on his heels, scanning the yard before looking back at me. "You know, I didn't think you'd show up," he said, taking a sip. "It's part of the job," I replied calmly. His jaw tightened, the smirk returning for a moment before slipping again. "You've changed," he said, studying me like he was trying to figure out how. I tilted my head, letting the silence speak for me, not giving him an answer he could twist into a joke. He laughed, the sound hollow. "Crown Foods needed this project more than you think," he said, lowering his voice. "I know," I said. His eyes widened, caught off guard before narrowing. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he muttered. "No," I replied, "just enough." A group near the smoker cheered as someone cracked a joke, the noise breaking the tension for a moment. Chad shifted, finishing the last of his beer before crushing the can in his hand. "You're still the same, Haley," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Just trying to prove something." I let out a breath, slow and steady, meeting his gaze without blinking. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not trying to prove it to you." His eyes flickered, the smirk slipping as he looked at me, the weight of unspoken truths pressing between us. He looked around, checking to see who was watching before leaning in just a little closer, his voice dropping. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, a mocking smile on his lips. "Good thing you didn't disappear after all." I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch as I stepped closer, my eyes steady. "The thing is," I said, my voice clear, "I did disappear." I paused, letting him hear every word. "And I came back," I continued, "while you're still exactly where you've always been." For a moment Chad's face went blank, the color draining, before he forced another laugh, turning away to wave at someone calling him from across the yard. I stood there, the breeze warm against my skin, feeling the weight lift from my chest, leaving behind a calm I had never known before. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. What would you have done if you were me? Because I knew in that moment karma didn't need to be loud to be felt. Matt stood at the door of my office, coffee in hand, eyes heavy with sadness. I looked up from my laptop, the morning light filtering through the blinds, painting lines across the floor between us. The scent of roasted beans drifted in as he held out the cup, a silent offering. "Haley," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't slept. I stayed seated, folding my hands on the desk, waiting. "I shouldn't have come without asking," he added, quickly glancing around the small office, taking in the sketches pinned to the corkboard, the plants on the windowsill, the quiet space that had become mine. I nodded, still silent, letting him find the words. "I was wrong," he said, taking a shaky breath. "I was wrong that day at the BBQ. I was wrong every time I stayed silent when they joked about you." I looked at him, watching the way his shoulders sagged as he spoke, how his eyes shifted before finding mine again. "I laughed with Chad because I was too weak to stand up to him," he said. "I thought keeping the peace was more important than protecting you." My chest tightened, memories flashing across my mind. The laughter at the table, the sting of being alone in a room full of people, the cold kitchen floor under my feet the night I packed my bag. "I've been going to therapy," Matt continued, his voice softer. "I've cut ties with Chad. I'm trying to be better, to be someone who deserves another chance." He stepped forward, placing the coffee on the edge of my desk, his eyes pleading. "I want to start over," he whispered. "With you." For a moment, the room felt small, filled with the ghosts of who we used to be, the promises we once made, the quiet mornings and late-night talks, the way I used to believe we could get through anything. I stood walking to the window, looking out at the street below, the morning traffic moving, people walking with their coffees and headphones, the world going on steady and alive. I remembered the night I left, the tears falling onto the hardwood floor as I zipped up my bag, the way the dawnlight felt on my face when I stepped outside, the air sharp and cold but clean. I turned back to him, meeting his eyes, seeing the hope there, the regret, the love that was still there, but love wasn't enough anymore. "Matt," I said softly, "you didn't lose me because of Chad." He frowned, confusion crossing his face. "You lost me because of you," I continued, my voice steady, kind but firm. "Because you chose silence when I needed your voice." He opened his mouth, but no words came. His shoulders dropped, and he looked down at the floor, breathing out a quiet, broken sigh. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall, each second passing like a reminder that the past couldn't be rewritten. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," I replied. He turned, walking to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame before glancing back, his eyes glistening. "I hope you get everything you deserve, Haley," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I already am," I replied. He nodded once before stepping out, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving the room quiet again, filled only with the soft hum of the city outside. I stood there, letting the moment settle, letting the weight lift from my shoulders as I closed my eyes for a moment. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever had to choose yourself even when it hurt? Because tomorrow I would stand on a stage in front of cameras, press, and the Williams family, ready to show them who I had become. I walked back to my desk, the coffee Matt brought still sitting untouched, the steam long gone. I picked it up, holding it for a moment before setting it down again, letting the finality of his visit settle in the quiet room. Outside, the city was alive, the hum of traffic and distant horns reminding me the world kept moving, no matter how heavy a single goodbye could feel. I pulled out my laptop, opening the final presentation deck for tomorrow. The launch for the Crown Foods rebrand would be public, with press partners and the Williams family all watching. This wasn't just another project anymore. This was proof to myself that I had built something real, something mine, even in the middle of the city where I once felt invisible. I checked my notes, reviewing talking points, pacing where to pause, where to emphasize. I practiced aloud, letting the words roll off my tongue, steady and clear. Real food. Real people. I stood in front of the mirror near my desk, speaking the opening lines, watching my reflection as I adjusted my posture, letting my shoulders relax, letting the confidence I had fought for show in the way I lifted my chin. My phone buzzed with a message from Tasha. "Big day tomorrow. Proud of you." I smiled, typing back. "Thank you, let's do this." The sun was setting, painting streaks of orange and lavender across the Austin sky, the light filtering through the window, catching the edges of the photos I had pinned on the wall. Designs I was proud of, moments I had captured, a reminder of the work that mattered. I thought of the night I left Dallas, the darkness pressing against the windows as Megan drove the way, my heart raced between fear and hope. I remembered stepping into the tiny Airbnb, the worn wooden floors, the quiet, the way the air smelled like lavender soap and clean sheets. I had nothing then but a laptop, a bag of clothes, and a promise to myself that I would not go back to who I was. And I hadn't. The phone rang and I saw Eleanor's name pop up. I answered, leaning against the window. "Hey," I said. "You ready?" she asked, her voice warm, grounding. "I am," I said, breathing out the words with certainty. "You're going to be great," she said. "Don't let their presence change your voice." "I won't," I said. "And remember," she added, "this is your story, not theirs." "Thank you," I said softly. We hung up and I stood there for a moment, the city lights blinking on as dusk settled, the hum of cicadas starting in the distance. I packed my bag carefully, checking cables, samples, and printed notes, each item a reminder that I wasn't showing up tomorrow to prove myself to them. I was showing up to honor the woman I had become. As I zipped the bag, the final click of the metal felt like a promise sealed. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever had to choose yourself even when it meant letting go of everything you once wanted? Because tomorrow I would stand in front of the press, the Williams family, and the world, not as someone's wife, not as someone's burden, but as Haley. And I was ready. I stepped onto the stage, the lights hitting me, and no one called me an outsider anymore. The ballroom was filled with rows of chairs, the air cool against my skin as the crowd settled, the low hum of voices fading as the host introduced me. I looked out across the room, seeing the Crown Foods banner hanging above the stage, the logo I had designed shining under the lights. In the front row, Chad sat with his arms crossed, a forced smile on his face, his eyes tight as they met mine. Patricia sat beside him, her pearl earrings catching the light, her posture stiff, lips pressed thin. Matt was there, two hands folded in his lap, watching me with a look I couldn't read, but it didn't matter anymore. I could see the press scattered throughout the room, cameras ready, notepads open, waiting. The CEO, Robert, stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady as he thanked the partners, the team, and then turned to me with a nod. Haley has led this project with clarity, vision, and a commitment to authenticity, he said, gesturing for me to take the mic. We are grateful for the new direction she has given Crown Foods. Applause filled the room, and for a moment the sound washed over me, grounding me as I took a breath and stepped forward. Thank you, Robert, I began, my voice clear, steady. Crown Foods has always been about family, but families change, and so do the people who build them. I clicked to the first slide, the new branding filling the screen behind me, warm colors and clean lines, a design that felt like a promise of something real. Customers today want honesty. I continued, moving to the next slide with photos of real people, families, workers, community markets. They want to see themselves in the brands they trust, not perfection but truth. I saw heads nodding, pens moving as I spoke about the data we had gathered, the feedback that guided our choices, the stories behind the design, the campaign rollout that would follow. I was no longer speaking to prove myself. I was speaking because I had something worth saying. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment before the applause came again, loud and genuine, the sound filling the space with something that felt like a quiet victory. Robert shook my hand, leaning in to say, "You did it." "Thank you," I replied, the words simple but heavy with everything they meant. As I stepped down from the stage, the press moved in, microphones and cameras pointed at me. "Haley, what inspired this direction? How do you feel seeing your work come to life on this scale?" I answered each question calmly, smiling, letting my voice carry the confidence I had earned. No longer the woman who once felt small in rooms like these. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I checked it, a message from Eleanor popped up. "Proud of you." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my bag as I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, letting the warmth of the moment anchor me. As I walked toward the back of the room, I glanced down at my left hand, the space where a ring used to sit, now empty, light hitting the skin, nothing weighing it down. Just me. As I made my way through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Chad standing near the refreshment table, surrounded by a few executives. His laugh was too loud, his smile too wide, and, for a moment, his eyes met mine. He raised his glass slightly, a forced smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. I nodded once, calm, unbothered, turning my attention back to the conversations around me. I shook hands with vendors and community leaders, each one thanking me, complimenting the vision, the clean messaging, the way it felt like the brand was finally alive. I took in each word with quiet gratitude, letting them land, without the need to prove myself anymore. Matt was there too, standing off to the side watching. Our eyes met, and he gave a small nod, a soft smile that was more goodbye than anything else. I returned it, letting it be enough. The press began to pack up, the lights dimming as the event moved toward its end, people filtering out into the warm Dallas night. I stepped outside, the air humid, carrying the scent of the nearby food trucks, the sky deepening into a dark blue. I pulled out my phone, seeing another message from Eleanor. "Now, breathe. You did it." I typed back. "I know. Thank you for believing in me." I walked slowly toward the parking lot, letting the cool air calm the adrenaline still buzzing under my skin. I looked up at the stars peeking through the city glow, remembering the girl who once stood in a driveway with a bag in her hand, terrified and free at the same time. I drove back to Austin that night, windows cracked, the warm air tangling my hair as I let the hum of the tires against the road remind me that I had chosen this, every mile earned, every moment mine. A week later, I found a small apartment near the lake, a place with creaking wooden floors and a balcony where I could sit in the mornings with coffee, watching the sun rise over the water. I unpacked boxes filled with sketchbooks, framed a few of my designs, and placed them on the wall above my desk. The first night in the new place, I lay on the floor, looking up at the ceiling, the hum of the ceiling fan mixing with the sounds of the city outside. I felt the silence settle around me, not empty, but comforting. I woke up early the next morning, pulling on a sweatshirt, stepping onto the balcony as the sky turned pink, the water catching the light. I held a mug of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands, breathing in the promise of the day. I opened my laptop, sitting at the small kitchen table, ready to begin again, building my client list, designing projects that felt alive, creating the kind of work that spoke for itself. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever had to walk away from everything to find yourself again? Chad once said that if I disappeared, no one would notice. And he was right. I disappeared from their world so I could step into my own. That morning I walked down to the lake, the gravel crunching under my sneakers, the air cool against my skin as the sun rose. The water was still reflecting the pink and gold skybirds calling softly across the quiet. I found a bench near the edge, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup, letting the steam warm my face as I watched the ripples move across the surface. I let the quiet in, letting it fill the spaces that had once felt empty, now something calm and steady. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see a text from Tasha. The numbers from launch week are in. You did it, Haley. I smiled, taking a slow breath, feeling the pride settle deep. Real earned. I typed back. Thank you for trusting me. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, a couple walked by holding hands, their laughter drifting behind them. I watched them for a moment, not with envy, but with a soft understanding that love, when it's right, doesn't need to be proven in rooms where you aren't seen. I headed back up the path, the city slowly waking as the sun climbed higher, dogs barking, neighbors jogging past, the world alive with quiet purpose. I reached my apartment, unlocking the door, stepping into the space that smelled like coffee and clean laundry, the morning light streaming across the wood floors. I opened my laptop, checking emails, a request for a new branding consultation already waiting, another small business looking to find its voice. I replied with a proposal, attaching a few slides from recent projects, confident in the way I knew I could help them. Later, I set up a small corner of the living room with a second-hand drafting table I found on Facebook Marketplace, pinning up color swatches, sketching out concepts for a local coffee shop that had reached out after seeing the Crown Foods rebrand. I put on music, soft acoustic guitar, letting it fill the room as I worked, my pencil moving across the paper lines, turning into ideas. Ideas turning into something real. Hours passed, the sun shifting across the sky, the light changing on the walls as I kept going, lost in the work that made me feel alive. In the afternoon, I took a break, pulling on a hoodie as I walked down the street to the small cafe on the corner. The barista recognized me now, smiling as she handed over my latte, the foam perfectly swirled on top. Your work was in the paper this week, right? She asked, tilting her head. It was, I said, feeling the warmth of her words. That's awesome, she said, handing me my change. Congrats. I thanked her, stepping outside, the cup warm in my hands as I walked back toward the lake, the breeze gentle, the world quiet in a way that felt comforting. I sat on the grass, sipping my coffee, watching the families, walking dogs, kids tossing sticks into the water for their retrievers, the smell of fresh cut grass drifting on the breeze. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the sunlight wash across my face, breathing in the peace that had taken me so long to find. My phone buzzed again, and I pulled it out, seeing a message from Eleanor. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I let them fall, soft and quiet, the kind of tears that come when you realize you've made it to the other side. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Have you ever had to rebuild everything to discover who you really are? Because Chad once told me if I disappeared, no one would notice. He was right. I disappeared from their world so I could finally step into my own.